So, despite saying I was going to see this weeks ago, I finally got around to seeing Bullet Train. So, I'm going to keep this review pretty brief for a few reasons. One, it's been out for almost a month, and if you have interest in the movie, you've probably already seen it, and you already know what you think of it. Two, I have other stuff to do, especially like watch Sylvester Stallone's Samaritan, and still contemplating whether or not I'll see that new Dragon Ball Super movie. And three, there's not a ton to say about this movie. I'm going to be perfectly blunt. Critics and audiences seem to be rather mixed about this movie. Like, critics are, dead in between, 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the audience scores out, 76, and a 7.5 on IMDb, and a 49% on Metacritic. So it seems like critics are pretty split on this. Audiences seem to like it a bit more, but it's still not, over positive. I mean, 7.5 on IMDb, that's nothing to scoff at. But there's also the fact that this movie just is already kind of fading into obscurity, because I don't really see people talking about this movie anymore, even though it's still in theaters. So, especially with the upcoming re-release of Spider-Man No Way Home, that's kind of the talk of the movie industry right now, since there was, nothing last week. They had Idris Elba's Beast and Dragon Ball Superhero, which beat out Beast, which is pretty funny, but I digress. So, I'm just gonna be rather blunt about this movie. I don't know if this is gonna be an unpopular opinion or not, but I just thought this was... I didn't particularly care for this. I didn't hate it, because there are some pretty good aspects of the movie, but there's also some really dumb stuff. And I'll start with the thing that I'll start with the worst aspect of the movie, the dialogue. This has some of the cringiest dialogue I've ever heard in my life. For example, something that almost made me walk out of the theater was because one of the main things about this is Ladybug. God, these people have such stupid code names, and we'll get more into that in a bit. Played by Brad Pitt, he's constantly talking about how he has such shit luck. And he doesn't get off the train on the first stop when he needs to, because he's he encounters the wolf, played by Bad Bunny, of all people. And he looks away, and he's like, Maria, who's played by Sandra Bullock for some reason, asks him, why didn't you get off the train? He said, because God hates me. And she replies with, no, she doesn't. Give me a goddamn break. I almost left the theater when I heard that, because I'm like, oh, it's this kind of movie. Thankfully, that was the only time it was that kind of movie, but I almost got up and walked out when I heard that, because that is, some of the stupidest dialogue I've ever heard. And when it comes to the comedy, honestly, it's just not that funny. It has some good lines to it, but most of the time it seems like it's funniest with physical comedy, which is weird when it comes to an action movie. Because there's also this, running bit where one of these assassins is obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine for some reason. And it's not just a one-time thing, or it happens every once in a while. Thomas the Tank Engine is mentioned probably 45 times in this entire movie. Maybe more. Every time this guy shows up on screen, he talks about Thomas the Tank Engine for some reason. What's the joke? That an adult is obsessed with a show made for 3-year-olds? I don't get it. The CGI is atrocious. When it does, practical stunts and everything, it looks pretty good, but when you have a CGI explosion, or when the train becomes CGI, it looks so artificial. Again, like I said in one of my other reviews, I don't remember which one it was, it was Secret Headquarters. It's not quite Prey level bad, because this movie had a bigger budget, but the CGI was still pretty noticeable, especially when it comes to the explosions and, flashback scenes. They look pretty bad. But there are some legitimately good things in this movie. The acting across the board is good, because you have a top-tier cast here. Brad Pitt is a pretty fun lead. The one who stole the show for me was Aaron Taylor Johnson. I think he's a really underrated actor, and I'm really looking forward to his Kraven the Hunter movie in January, and I really hope the MCU brings him back as Quicksilver. I really liked him in that movie. Brian Tyree Henry, who was the black dude in Eternals, I don't know, he's fun. He's decent. He's a good actor, obviously. But again, when it comes to his, obsession with Thomas the Tank Engine, it's just... I just sat there confused. I wasn't angry or anything, because there's nothing to get angry at. I was just sitting there so confused, like, why is this still coming up? Why is this a recurring thing in this movie? Joey King is in this, as the Prince is what she's called. Oh, by the way, Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry, their characters, Tangerine and Lemon. No, I'm serious. So Joey King's, who's named the Prince, yeah, there's some irony in there, but I don't care. Like, her performance isn't bad, but I hated the character. Not just the fact that she was kind of obnoxious, but she could have been cut and you wouldn't miss much. Because that entire storyline, there are times when it just kind of feels like it's tacked on to pad out the length of the movie. And it's not like they kill her at any point, because God forbid we kill the strong female in this movie. Because they just kind of leave her alive. I don't even think she gets, like, arrested or anything or like that. It's just, she just gets away scot-free, pretty much. Why? She's not even involved in the final battle. Andrew Koji, who played Storm Shadow in Snake Eyes, he's pretty good in this movie. He doesn't have a ton of screen time, but he does what he can with it, and he's a lot of fun. Hiroyuki Sanada, I think that's how you say it, plays his father, called the Elder, and that's probably like the only code name that isn't fucking stupid. And he's pretty badass. He has a lot of, and he doesn't have a ton of screen time. He shows up in the last like half hour. But he's pretty cool in that time. He's like one of the only characters that's actually cool in this movie. Michael Shannon is the villain, White Death. Was it White Death or something? Something like that. White Death or White Plague, something like that. And his hairstyle's ridiculous. I'm pretty sure it's a wig, and it looks ridiculous, but he was decent as the villain. I personally think they shouldn't have cast like an big star for that role. I think it should have just been, I think his face should have been covered the whole time. I think it would have been a lot better if it was just like, if he was more of an entity rather than a human, because just have his face covered the whole time, he becomes more, like I said, more of an entity. It just seemed like more of a threat than Michael Shannon with this cheap-ass Gandalf wig. Bad Bunny plays the Wolf. I'm not sure why they cast a rapper in this, though to be fair, Sony cast him as El Muerto for some fucking reason. Still know why that movie's getting paid. Like, Kraven the Hunter, I get. Madam Web, I get. El Muerto? He was in 2 comic books. 2, and it's not like he has any superpowers. But, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, he was pretty decent in the small amount of screen time he had, though his death scene was pretty laughable, and not enough. It wasn't even funny. It was so stupid that I couldn't help but laugh. He literally throws a knife, and it bounces off the case, and it hits him in the chest. Okay, that's not how physics works. It's not just gonna bounce off and then ricochet right back. If it bounced off that, it'd probably just been... That's how knives work. And also the fact that the villain basically ends up killing himself somehow. Like, he shoots and then all of a sudden, like, half his head explodes off. Like, did it ricochet off the case? I didn't see the case in that scene. I don't know what the fuck happened. Sandra Bullock's here. I'm not a huge fan of Sandra Bullock. I never have been. So, moving on. Zazie Beetz plays... I don't remember the character's name, but she's in the movie for 5 minutes. And I think the reason she was in this movie is because this director is the director of Deadpool 2, which is something I'll get to in a second when I talk about something else. And lastly, the only person left to talk about for now is Logan Lerman. He plays the son of Michael Shannon's character. And again, he's in the movie for just a few minutes, but he's fine. I like Logan Lerman, so... But again, this story is probably one of the biggest problems with this, because it's so dumb. Like, the White Death essentially got all these assassins on board this train so he could kill all of them, and one of the ones he wanted to kill is being filled in by Brad Pitt. So already that's kind of dumb, and the reveal at the end that he got everybody there, like, it would have been clever in different circumstances. But this does lead to one brilliant scene. One brilliantly funny scene where he's like, I'm not Carver. That's what, like, the assassin that was supposed to be there. And it briefly cuts to Carver, the real Carver, and it's Ryan Reynolds. Now, on face value, it's just like, oh, a celebrity cameo, great. But it becomes really brilliant when the director of this, David Leitch, also directed Deadpool 2, and that was a movie that starred Ryan Reynolds and had a surprise cameo by Brad Pitt. Here, same director, stars Brad Pitt and has a cameo by Ryan Reynolds. That is brilliant. I don't know how many people actually noticed this, because most of the people I heard in the theater were just like, oh, hey, it's Ryan Reynolds. So I don't think most people got the joke, but someone like me who's a huge film buff, I busted laughing. I think there were a few people who's like, okay, it's just not that. There were probably a few people in the theater who's like, okay, yeah, it's Ryan Reynolds, it's not that funny, because they clearly didn't get the joke. But I did, and I thought it was fucking brilliant. And the action sequences are pretty decent. There's actually less of them than you would think, because the trailers made this look a lot better than it is. The more and more trailers I saw, like the ones like all the TV spots looked pretty bad, but the full trailers looked pretty cool. And like I said, this isn't a bad movie, but I found myself checking my watch quite a few times especially during the second half. I found myself checking my watch saying, how long is this movie? And it's about 2 hours, like without credits, it's probably about 2 hours on the dot. Probably about 2 hours on the dot. I don't know what happened to my voice there. So yeah, it's not a terrible movie, I'd say if you haven't seen it already, I'd say just wait for rental. I don't think I'd recommend paying full price for this movie. Like I said, like I've been saying, it's not a bad movie. This is something I've been saying a lot the last few movies, like especially this month in particular, and like most of last month as well. It's not a bad movie, but it needed to be a lot better. The dialogue needed to be fixed a bit. The story needed at least one more draft. At least one more. And the CGI needed to be touched up. You can tell they spent most of the money on the cast for this movie, which is fine, but then don't resort to shitty CGI. So, that's all I got for Bullet Train. I'm giving this a C. I don't know how many people are going to hate me for this. I don't know how many people are going to agree with me on this, but really, I don't care. So, that's all I got for Bullet Train. Now I got to go see Samaritan and possibly Dragon Ball Super Superhero. So, we'll just have to find out. Later.